Now, the BuckeyeXtra podcast with Joey Kaufman and Rob Oller from the Columbus Dispatch.
Hello, listeners. It's December 1st. Welcome back to another edition of the BuckeyeXtra Football Podcast. I'm Joey Kaufman. That's Rob Oller. After Ohio State defeated Michigan on Saturday, Ryan Day said he had thought a long time about what he would say in his postgame press conference after win over Michigan, but he was going to save those comments. Have you, Rob, thought for a long time what you would say on a podcast after Ohio State beat Michigan? And I hope you're not saving those comments.
I'm not saving my comments. I will say that, yes, for those who were paying attention, I picked Michigan. I'm falling on my sword here. And part of it was, I wouldn't say tongue in cheek, but my reasoning a little bit was, well, I picked Ohio State the last 4 years and how'd that work out for the Buckeyes. So let's mix it up. And the way the game started, Joey, I thought, well, you know what? Michigan looks pretty good. Julian Sand throws the pick, the momentum, but Michigan could only cash in with 3 points, not seven. It would have been interesting to see what would have happened if Michigan could have converted, turned those field goals into touchdowns, been up, 10-0. How much the dynamic would have changed, I'm not sure that the Wolverines win anyhow. Anyhow, my thoughts on it are finally Ryan Day gets the monkey off his back. I mean, any critics that Ryan Day has now it's just they personally don't like him. They don't like either the crying Ryan Day reputation. I know some fans who are like they'll never really buy into him because they didn't like the Lou Holtz comment. They just don't like him. Which, hey, okay, fine. There's coaches out there, there's people out there for whatever reason. There's not real rational reason. It's just they don't like him. So that number has dwindled and continues to dwindle. And really, there's no reason. I think the whole thing is flipped now. I mean, it flipped big time when they won the national title. A lot of his critics kind of were silenced. But now that he'd been 0-4 the last four against UM. Now it's like, what's not to like about Ryan Day? He says the right things. He's got the best winning percentage in history. Now, this is what, year 7? So usually they look, whenever you see these stats about he's got an 881 or whatever winning percentage it is, you typically, like for the NCAA to recognize it, it's 10 years. You have to have 10-year tenure for these numbers to actually stick. So, but he's looking pretty good. Anyhow, the bottom line on Ryan Day is everyone suddenly, those who didn't like him suddenly love him.
Yeah, it's been a remarkable 365-day turnaround for Ryan Day because exactly 1 year ago, Ross Bjork spoke to our paper and gave Ryan Day a public backing because his job was, I wouldn't say in jeopardy, but in question. People wondered what the future of his tenure was going to be. They were 10-2 at the end of the regular season, a 4 straight loss to Michigan, and we're looking at an incredibly difficult road to win a national championship. And ever since then, it's been gravy for Ohio State because this has been just a remarkable year. They go on this playoff run, and then I think people maybe expected this year, okay, a lot of pieces gone, and maybe they're not going to be as good. Well, they look better, and they're poised for a repeat. And all of a sudden, this looks like Nick Saban era Alabama, and just a machine that just rolls through people. So just the last year has been just a crazy flipping of the script for Ryan Day. And on Saturday, it was the rivalry, and just so much has played out over a year. And sort of the final piece of it really was the Michigan game. There is the Big Ten championship game later this week, and that would undoubtedly be a feather in his cap. But there was no, I think, game on the schedule that had so much, I think, emotion with it as that Michigan game. And it was going to be interesting to see how he reacted after that game because, Rob, you and I have talked about it in the past. His infamous or famous Lou Holtz rant from 23 after the win over Notre Dame was was not really about Lou Holtz in a sense. It was a lot of pent up frustration about not being able to beat Michigan and being perceived as a quote unquote tough team. And so I didn't really expect it, but there was a part of you that did wonder what kind of reaction would he have to finally getting over the hump against Michigan for the first time since his first season. And he spared us from sort of the internal monologue, and I think kind of took the high road in the end. But maybe someday in the future he'll really sort of spill it all.
Yeah, if he'd have been a fly on the wall in the locker room afterward, I'm sure that would have been a different Ryan Day. The tone toward Michigan, but yeah, he took the high road. It was we want to win with humility. Of course, as someone said, when you say you want to win with humility, how much humility is in that statement? But the point taken that they weren't going to embarrass the program, the university, by doing dumb stuff. Now, some dumb stuff was done. Jeremiah Smith flipping the bird, Michigan fans. That didn't get talked about a lot. It was very quick. It was caught on camera. Um, and it's funny, everyone talks about a flag. We joked about this afterwards. The flag planning did not happen. Ohio State players, several, did have flags, but there was no, there was just a flag. There was no, what do you call it, the post?
Yeah, the flags were not affixed to a
There was
pole
no there was no
planting that
pole.
flag.
It would have been a flag draping
A
on
flag
the
waving.
flag waving, flag draping. But Ryan Day and staffers and even other players stepped in to those re relatively hot-headed Buckeyes and said, "No, no, just go to the locker room." Of course, the other fallout from this, and I guess we'll get to the game at some point, but this is the peripheral stuff that people love talking about, was Michigan. They didn't go to the locker room after the game, and it turned out kind of looking kind of silly and dumb. They all gathered at midfield to protect the M so no Ohio State player would try to plant a flag. And I didn't know what was going on initially. And I was like, why aren't they going to the locker room? And someone said, well, they're being held so Ohio State can go in the locker room first. And I said, no, that's not the case. So, all these memes and that, that they worked harder at protecting the M than playing in the game. So that was some fallout. That's the great thing about the rivalry. There's always these little knick-knacky things that happen, whether it's Brutus crossing out the M in the snow or whatever it may be, Buckeyes jumping into the stands. That's kind of what makes these rivalries great. Now, getting to the game, what was your takeaway? Main takeaway?
Well, I was trying to think about it, and if you were to explain what's the biggest reason why they were flipping the rivalry, it's almost difficult to pick, and maybe I'll let you attempt to do so. But they got better play across the board this year. I thought the play calling from Brian Hartline was really good. The balance with the mix and the pass. I think the impact of Bo Jackson was significant. Having Jeremiah Smith and Cardinal Tate healthy, the defense didn't fold after an early lead. It felt like in every area they got what they needed. And last year it felt like everything that went wrong truly did go wrong for them. But I still think the most about, I think getting Tate and Smith back for this game was significant. The big play of the game early on was Ohio State was trailing 6-3 early in the second quarter. It was 4th and 5 at Michigan's 35-yard line. The game's sort of in the balance at that stage, and they go for it all. And Julian Sayin hits Jeremiah Smith down the sideline after Jeremiah makes this nasty double move on the perimeter to break open. I wouldn't recommend single coverage on him, but nonetheless, that's what Michigan tried, and he catches it. And there seemed to be some controversy about whether he held on to possession at the end of it and went for a touchback. Ultimately, the officials upheld the call, but that moment of the game felt really important. Ohio State has not really been able to deliver those shot plays against Michigan in the past, and certainly not last year, where Will Howard was limited, and even before he got knocked out of the game, was picked off by Michigan toward Ohio State's own end zone. So to me, being able to hit those big plays, there was a 50-yard pass to Carnell Tate in the second half, but really that first one kind of broke it open because they got a lead over Michigan, and they have not led at halftime in the game in several years.
Yeah, great points. I also thought that the little slant to Brandon Ennis on a really nice play call was huge too for a touchdown. But to your point, yeah, I thought if there'd been no Tate and no Smith, I'm not saying different outcome guaranteed, but in terms of score or who won, but clearly they are key to it because if they're not there, Ohio State doesn't really have the separator, the breakaway speed guy that Tate is or Smith. And you saw it on the Tate touchdown, and then the Smith play. So remove those two plays and you got a ball game. And those two guys made the play. Now, Sayin got them the ball, and he's the key to the whole thing, of course. But and I didn't see any ill effects, really, at least the eye test on the injuries to those two receivers. They looked pretty darn good. And in pregame warmups, maybe their cuts didn't look quite as crisp and that, but in the game, it was clearly good enough. And Ryan Day went on and on after the game, and then in the wake of that about the training staff getting those two guys up to speed and what good job they did and blah 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 and I assume they did because they looked pretty good.
I think it was interesting because after the game, they admitted that like Jeremiah barely practiced during the week. He said he was really limited, and so that even that first touchdown to Jeremiah, that was one they hadn't really practiced all week. He said they just ran it in walkthroughs. I think that really shows just the chemistry Sayin and Smith have just to deliver that kind of play and that kind of clutch moment and that kind of trust you have in your quarterback and your receiver to deliver that situation. Because if that comes up empty, I don't know if Ohio State loses the game, but it's a lot more tense. They're down 6-3 at that point, and it felt like when Michigan was able to play with the lead, they were able to kind of stick to running the ball. And when they got behind, it put a lot on freshman quarterback Bryce Underwood. And that was a situation I think Ohio State was looking at its chops and throwing different pressures at him. There was one point Caleb Downs lined up along the edge of the line of scrimmage and ran in on a blitz. That was a situation where Ohio State was going to win. If the game was about Michigan just handing off to Jordan Marshall over and over and over, they're a better spot, or even having Bryce Underwood run the ball, which they didn't do a ton of in this game. But if it was him throwing it and allowing Ohio State to tee off, that was a better shot. So as soon as Ohio State got a lead in that game, it felt like they were in a well positioned. And for Michigan, I'm sure they got to be kicking themselves after only going up 6-0 after those two early drives, because Ohio State did everything they could not to get off to a fast start.
Yeah. um You know what? My instant analysis after the game was that the defense was the MVP of the game and really the season. I think it's hard to dispute that the defense is MVP of the season. But I would be remiss if I didn't maybe even change that or give equal credit to the offensive line. You had some amazing stats that you came up with in terms of protecting sand, in terms of opening holes. Now let's face it, Bo Jackson ran really hard and he's really good. I think yards after contact, you have a stat on that in terms of like 94 or 90 some of his
94 of 117 were after
yeah,
contact.
94 of his 117 yards, Bo Jackson came after contact. That's pretty strong. But the O line, which has not been terrible this year, honestly, but nobody would say that it's been steamroller, incredible. I think protecting Sayin, they've done a really good job, in terms of run blocking. Who knows? But I think maybe the MVP of the game was the O line.
Yeah, they were. I mean, the way they protected Julian Sayin was outstanding. The stat from Pro Football Focus was that Sayin was only pressured on 2 out of his 26 dropbacks in the game, which was the least amount of pressure he had faced at any point in a game this season, with the exception of Grambling State. So they did a great job of giving him time to throw. And you think about the way this rivalry changed 4 years ago, where Michigan was able to break Ohio State's 8 game winning streak, get their first win over Ohio State since 2011. It came because Aiden Hutchinson and that Michigan defensive line just swarmed Ohio State, and CJ Stroud was under constant duress in the snow. And this was the opposite, where Julian Sayin had all this time. And Michigan tried to send extra rushers. They tried to blitz, but Sayin was able to handle it, and the offensive line handled it. I think, too, Sayin does such a good job of getting rid of the ball quickly. I think the offensive line obviously deserves the majority of the credit for keeping him upright. But he does a really nice job of being quick in his decision making and being quick in his release. I mean, there was one time where there was a free rusher who came off the edge and he took a nasty shot. One of the times he was pressured, but he actually completed it. He dumped it off to Bo Jackson, who was in the flats. And that's the thing with Sayin is he sees it really fast and he gets rid of the ball because his release is so smooth and quick. So I think he gets some of that credit as well for protecting himself.
Yeah, while you're on saying quick aside here before we get back to the game, it'll be Sayin versus Mendoza, maybe for the Heisman
Yeah.
Saturday. I think Mendoza the odds on favorite at the moment to win it by Vegas. I don't know, it's close, but you got Mendoza, the quarterback for Indiana, and you have Sayin for Ohio State. I think we said before the Michigan game, Sayin they had to win the game and he had to play pretty well to stay in the hunt. After the pick, I thought, oh, where's this going? But then he steadied himself, and so Mendoza. It's not just Indiana versus Ohio State. It's Mendoza versus Sayin, possibly for the Heisman, and maybe even probably for the Heisman.
Was just at the thought, and we will preview Indiana actually more
Sure.
in the
That
week.
was an aside. That was an aside, by the
I'll
way.
make one more quick aside of that, or maybe I should save the point. But Mendoza is a senior. Sain's only a
Yeah.
redshirt freshman, and I do wonder. A lot of old school voters have some deference to upperclassmen, and I just wonder if Mendoza plays well enough, even if Indiana were to lose, but has a good game, if he still may have an edge over Sayin because
I
he's
agree. I agree with that. I agree with that. It's old school. The Heisman voters tend to be old school thinking. Um, but he has to play well. I think
yeah,
if they
he would
lose,
have he would have to play well, and they would
he
have to
has to
lose
play
close.
well, lose a close game. Maybe he can play even, I think, with Sayin. As long as Sayin doesn't have the game of his life and Mendoza kind of stumbles, I would agree with you that Mendoza probably still has the advantage. Although I just don't know how the voters, I don't have a vote. I don't know how the voters look at win versus loss. That probably carries more weight maybe than I think in terms of which team won, regardless of the quarterback
Yeah,
play.
there are a lot of times in Heisman history where the yeah the instance I think about is 1967. USC and UCLA played in the game of the century, and OJ had this OJ Simpson had this great run to win the game for USC, but Gary Beeman, the UCLA quarterback, who was on the losing side, was a year ahead of OJ in school and actually won the Heisman that year over OJ. And a big part of it was it was his last year to win it. OJ ended up winning the following year, but that's the example that immediately comes to mind. Even though the other team's running back makes the game winning run, that's just how it played out. But we'll talk more about Mendoza, Sayin, Signetti, Day, OSU, IU a little bit later on this week. I think as far as Ohio State, Michigan goes, we talked about Bo Jackson, the offensive line. That was something they didn't have last year, where just they were able to really move the ball on the
I
ground
think
in a
I
way.
think they had it. They
Yeah,
just
not
didn't
not
either.
not in that game, not in that game. Because
Yeah, not in that game. I mean, it's hard to say with Trevion Henderson and Quinshawn Judkins, that tandem, that was together was better than what Ohio State has this year in totality, I would say. Um, but they just botched it last year. They botched it. I would say they used the pass to set up the run this year, and they were a little more creative and they blocked better. And let's face it, we said this on the car on the harrowing drive from Ann Arbor back to our hotel near Detroit after the game that this Michigan defense and specifically the defensive line was not what it was last year when they had two guys go first round NFL, Grant and Grant and I can't remember the other guy. But yeah, so Michigan wasn't as good. Ohio State was just as good or better. Therefore, Ohio State ends the streak and regains the crown.
I think that's all fair. To me, I get Michigan. I think was really hurt by not having a healthy backfield. Jordan Marshall was out for a prolonged period during the game. He only finished with 7 carries. It felt like maybe they got away from getting him the ball early on because it opened with that 36-yard run, and that was really big. And then not having Haynes, the other back, just they didn't have the opportunity to really run the ball as much as they wanted. I was surprised Bryce Underwood didn't run more. He only ran 6 times. And it felt like in that kind of game, they were going to need to run him more. Ohio State's done a really nice job this year, though, of spying some of the more mobile quarterbacks. So I know that's sort of been an Achilles heel for them at times in the past, but they've done, I think, a really nice job of keeping some of these guys contained this year when they have faced quarterbacks who can run. So Michigan was shorthanded, but Ohio State did a nice job of getting out to the lead and forcing Michigan to throw it. I mean, there were times early on where it just felt like a little bit deja vu in the past because Sagan threw that early pick, and my first thought was Kyle McCord did the same thing in 23, and they just put Ohio State in the hole, and they never recovered. It was the third straight year where Ohio State's had a quarterback in the first half of the game throw an interception in their own territory to start the game, and just they were giving Michigan an opportunity. And then they also had that other drive where they got the ball, even though they were down 6-0. The defense did a good job. Ohio State got down to the 3-yard line and couldn't punch it in, even though Michigan had that roughing the I think it was, I can't remember if it was a roughing the passer or a late hit. It was a penalty that reset the drive. So they had 6 plays at the inside the 3-yard line. They couldn't punch it in. I think their short yardage situation still leaves much to be desired. And then when they did try to have say and throw on 3rd down or 4th down, it was negated by a false start and they ended up kicking the field goal. So that hurt them.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, it didn't. It was not a great start for the Buckeyes, which coming out, all they said was, "Oh, we have to start fast," and they didn't. So you can look at that two ways. Or turn around. Hey, it showed poise. It showed a lack of panic. Settle down, and they settled into their rhythm and won. And Matt Patricia deserves a lot of credit. Jim Knowles was a really good defensive coordinator. There's been no drop off, and in fact, this defense might even be better. Now the personnel might be better too, quite honestly. Which, when you think about last year's team, Sawyer, JT, you had Downs, you had Igbinosun, um, but this team has not dropped off at all. It's just you got Caden Curry. Um, they're really good. And I think that's going to be the thing. If they win the national title, if they go on and win a national title, ultimately that defense holding teams to under 20 points is going to be what does it.
First time Ohio State held Michigan without a touchdown in this game since 2007.
Yeah, wow.
And Michigan had three trips inside the 30-yard line, including one that got down inside the 10. So they are just really good in that area of the field. They bend, but they don't break. And that was something they even did last year a little bit with Knowles. I mean, the goal line stand against Texas will go down in Buckeye lore, but they have just it's partly, I think, scheme, but also just the mentality too. They just do not give in those situations. A lot of teams, you get down that side of the field. I remember Caden Curry talking about it earlier this year. He said that sometimes you see it, you go on a drive, you have the offense go on a drive, and they're right down in that spot of the field against you. You're like, well, they got this one. Ohio State does not have that mentality, and they're able to hold. And I think so much of the conversation this week, you wondered about just what was Ohio State's psychological situation. Would they get in a hole against Michigan? Would they get in some tough spots, and would they wilt? And would the team sort of have that feeling of here we go again? But I don't think those scars of the past really seem to hurt them. And maybe it helped to have some of the new faces in the rivalry this year. Julian Sayano had only been a third string quarterback for a year with the Buckeyes. He hadn't gone through situations like that in the game before. Bo Jackson was a freshman. You have guys in the defensive line, Caden Curry, who's starting for the first time. So you have part of your roster who have not been sort of the leading cast before, and they were a supporting cast or playing in high school. So I think that getting a new group, I think was in a way helpful for them, because maybe they didn't have the same wounds that the last year's team had, which was a very senior laden group, which helped them in the playoff go on that run. But they were also a group that had never beaten Michigan and had gone through 3 straight losses to them before they ultimately suffered a 4th. So I think in some ways they actually probably helped Ohio State.
Listen to you going deep psychology on this thing. Yeah, I agree with everything you said. Now, let's look at the practical. You just wrote a story how Ryan Day changed things up this year, which you can explain what changes happened. I made the joke, well, oh, I'm sorry, he kept things the same. By doing so, he changed things up. Meaning, when you change the routine for the guys who've been under that routine for a couple years, then it is changing things up. It's not keeping things the same. I'm probably confusing the issue. Why don't you explain what changes or what things they kept the same, and did that make a difference?
It's hard to say, but they did make some changes, and they've made changes to Michigan week before. They moved senior tackle to the postseason in 22. But the changes they made this year were wider across the board. The band's visit, which had been Sunday of Michigan week, was moved to an idle week in late October. The media availability schedule had not changed. Typically, what Ohio State would do would have sort of one big media day to begin Michigan week, maybe Monday or Tuesday. They did not do that this year. They had day as usual, talk on Tuesdays, and then players Wednesday after practice. But probably the biggest change for the team was they flew to Michigan rather than the typical bus ride on Friday. And they tried to make the itinerary around the game more akin to a typical game week. And it is hard to do because the Michigan game, it's the rivalry game. It comes with a lot of emotions, and it also takes place during Thanksgiving week. And you have the holiday comes Thursday, and some of the local players can go home to their families in Ohio. So a lot of guys are on campus or at their position coaches' houses for the holiday to eat some turkey. But those are the main changes. And I asked Ryan Day about it on a teleconference um, Sunday night, and he said, "Was that the difference? Who knows? But everything matters." So I think he did take some of that script seriously, just how you structure the week. Not the first time they've done it this year. When they went to play Washington in September, they moved the schedule around, so they ended up flying out a day early to acclimate to the West Coast, which was different than what they had done previously. When they went to play Oregon last year, they treated it like they were playing Nebraska, but it was you're going 2 further time zones. You're going further west. So they made some changes around their routine around games this year, and this one's an easy one to say that it worked because they won. And if they hadn't won, then the narrative is totally the other way around, where you end up pointing out, hey, did the head coach err in judgment by making the Michigan week like any other week? Because it's not. It's Michigan week. And so sometimes when you win the rivalry game, you get to write your own story. And that's what happens with these changes in a way. It looks smart in hindsight and the way they kind of structured things. But if they had not won, then I think Ryan Day would have been even more of a magnet for criticism for changing the Michigan week and deviating from what's made Ohio State successful in the past in the game.
Exactly. And there were a couple other benefits from them flying, which one of them somewhat humorous, Ryan. They got because of the weather and the snow, they were delayed on the tarmac for a while, couldn't fly. So on one hand, Ryan Day said, it wasn't the worst thing because we have good guys on this team, but being on the plane meant they couldn't go out and celebrate. And who knows after, the all the pent-up frustration, how much celebrating would have gone on back in Columbus by players. Instead, they were stuck on a plane and until they got back to Columbus flying back. The other thing was that didn't he say something about it gave them time to look at film or something like Indiana? They were actually doing work while they're sitting in the plane, at least the coaches, um, for upcoming games.
He said they'd already watched the Michigan game on film by the time they got back in Columbus, so they were able to start afresh on Indiana.
There you go. Who knows how much that is, but eh, everything matters, right, Ryan Day?
Everything matters. Well, it's good to know for Buckeye Nation that they were watching film, not Netflix, I guess, on the tarmac.
Good point. Okay, what else about anything else? I think this does break the ice in terms of moving forward for them. I mean, Michigan was young. True freshman quarterback. I think they had redshirt freshmen, three or four redshirt freshmen on the O line. I mean, Michigan should on paper be better next year, I think. But the monkey's off Ryan Day's back. I think he's got a formula now. And so we'll see going forward. I guess what I'm saying is I don't see another four in a row for Michigan. If anything, it could be four in a row for Ohio State. Or I think for the rivalry, it's not bad to have like a little back and forth going, like it was in the 70s,
Yeah, and we haven't had that in a while because
right?
each decades tended to be owned by one school. This decade so far had been Michigan, and the previous 2 decades were Ohio State, and then the 90s were obviously Michigan. So you haven't had the back and forth nature to the rivalry in a good little while. I think it'll be interesting to just see how Ohio State does, and obviously in future years, Day is now 2-4 against Michigan, and the coaches in this game for Ohio State have had these wildly different records. Urban Meyer was, of course, 7-0. Jim Tressel was 9-1. John Cooper was 2-10-1. So you tend to sort of be all or nothing in this game. And Dave's a little closer to 500 now. Not the record he probably wants, and really probably should be at least 3-3 and maybe even 4-3 if the 2020 game happens. But it just the extremes have been such in this recent addition to the rivalry where the coach is either perfect against Michigan or he can't win against Michigan. And so even if Ryan Day does not turn out to have a record like Urban or Tressel, it doesn't mean he's destined to have a record like Cooper had. So you sort of it doesn't always have to be an all or nothing thing. It's been the recent flavor of it. But what was Woody? I think Woody was 16-11
Yeah,
against
Woody was good early, and Michigan in the 60s was kind of honestly. And in the 50s, I don't know how good they were, honestly. But people also forget it was a different time. But Woody lost his last three games before he threw the punch and got fired. He had lost three straight games to Michigan. And revisionist history. Um, I was a young lad back then, relatively young lad in the mid late 70s, and I remember my brother and I talking about this, and it said it's time for Woody to go. Yeah, maybe that's blasphemy, but I mean, people, Saint Woody and the whole thing, but Woody had kind of worn out his welcome to a certain extent among a growing number of Ohio State fans because it just, Michigan won the last three. Ohio State was playing in, the Orange Bowl one year and then in the Gator Bowl where it all went south. So, you know, I think history is a great teacher. And you look back and you say, yeah, Ryan Day lost four. That's not good. And to come full circle, something you said earlier, and I want to touch on this. It was if they don't beat Tennessee last year after losing to Michigan, my personal feeling is they do not fire him. But I also think the season's over after losing to Michigan. You lose to Tennessee at home in the first playoff game. But I think there would have been sort of an ultimatum at that point of it has to change and it has to change this year. And you have to beat Michigan, which they just did. I don't think they would have canned Ryan Day. Now, would have Ryan Day stuck around? Would he have looked to leave? That's another question because the abuse he took in his family and just what comes with losing at Ohio State. But they didn't. They won against Tennessee. They went on the run. They won it all. He gained himself at least a couple free get out of jail card years. And now that he's beat Michigan, I think he calls the shots. I don't know if you agree with that, but I think he probably is here as long as he wants to be, with the caveat being, I can't imagine he's here 5 years from now on his own. Now, who knows? Who knows? But I think that the shelf life of coaches anymore is you don't get the Woody Hayes, you don't even get the Nick Sabans. It seems like guys move around either to the NFL or they have a couple of off years and get whacked by the administration and the AD. I don't think that happens here, but I'll be curious what Ryan Day's future is. I think I'd be surprised if Ryan Day is here in 5 years.
I make no predictions on those
Well, I'm
questions.
not saying I want that.
I know, but I'm adding that caveat because I mean
Kirby's
The Ohio State job does wear you out like no other job, and the years at Ohio State are like dog years for head coaches. But he's written a remarkable
hmm,
story in the last year, and just the narrative that Ryan Day couldn't get over the big one in Ohio State was the dominant one just over a year ago, and since then he's won a national championship and he's well positioned to be Ohio State's first coach since Woody to win back to back. And it was striking to hear Kurt Signetti on the Big Ten teleconference Sunday night call Ryan Day, you'll be one of the legends of the game someday. I never really thought about that tagline for Ryan Day, legendary coach. But if they keep this up even just a few more years, I mean, he's going to have a resume that will be unmatched to Ohio State since Woody. So, I mean, how else do you be descriptive? He's already going to, at this point, I think, be a college football Hall of Famer one day. So
yeah,
he just the narrative that surrounded him a year ago has just been set ablaze.
it has. I think he surpassed. I mean, before Ryan Day, I would have said last year, middle of the season, Kirby Smart of Georgia would have been the guy. I mean, they won back-to-back titles. Georgia was the king of the SEC after Saban left. And Kirby, I will amend my earlier statement. Kirby Smart's been there for I don't know how many years, but he's been there a decent, what, 10, 12
Almost
years?
a decade since 2016.
Almost a decade for Kirby Smart. So he's stuck around and he doesn't look
And
like he's ready to
he
leave.
is a Georgia alum.
Yeah,
So
yeah. So
that is home to him. I do think it will be fascinating. We'll see how the playoff bracket comes out and how all that shakes out. But if we do down the road see Ohio State play Georgia in a playoff game, because those are two programs and two head coaches right now where it feels like they are sort of trying to replace and fill the vacuum left by Nick Saban's retirement, where Alabama was the dominant program for much of the last decade and a half, and his retirement sort of left the door open for somebody else and some other program to swoop in, and maybe the revenue sharing era and the NIL has created a little more parity. But college football still, at the end of the day, is a sport that has produced no shortage of dynasties. And those two coaches feel like if you were to identify who could be the next program where they are the king of the sport, I mean, those are it. So I think it would be very fitting if Ohio State does play Georgia at some point in January.
I think it jumps back to Saban and Urban, right? When Urban was at Florida and Saban was Alabama, and they were the two kingpins of college football. So you could have, to your point, yeah, Ryan Day versus Kirby Smart part two. Everyone remembers the famous or infamous Georgia Ohio State game and the missed field goal at midnight. This would be a rematch. And I think in some ways, we don't really want to go down this road too much, but Georgia may be the toughest out there. I think Notre Dame's interesting too, but we'll save that for another podcast. The fact is that Ryan Day is calling his own shots now. He is everything you'd want in a coach. He says the right things. He doesn't say the wrong things. Hello, Lane Kiffin. And they're at the top of the game. They have a chance to be the new Alabama. And I don't know if you said this, maybe I misheard you, but this would be the first time Ohio State won back-to-back national
Right.
titles.
Yeah, first ever repeat.
Yeah, they won in 54 and 57 under Woody. That's the closest they came. Actually, maybe the closest they came was 68, 69, but they lost to Michigan. If they'd beaten Michigan, they'd be national title champs. But yeah, I mean, and at this point, you'd have to say they're clearly the favorite to do it. Now, get back to us, after Indiana, Ohio State this coming Saturday in the Big Ten championship game. That's why that's an intriguing game, which we will preview later in the week.
Yeah, I think that game is going to be really revealing for just where Ohio State is. It's a trophy game because if Ohio State loses, they won't be the one seed, but they're still going to have a bye. So for all intents and purposes, in terms of trying to structure their playoff path or national championship path, doesn't change a whole lot for the Buckeyes. But I do think it will be their our best shot to kind of see Ohio State in a heavyweight type of matchup. I mean, Indiana's a very good team. They're 12-0. They're the only other unbeaten left in college football. They are so efficient and well coached, and Cignetti has them clicking it's clearly the best quarterback Ohio State has faced all season, and an experienced guy who's going to be able to handle everything that or not. We'll see if he's able to handle everything, but he's certainly going to be able to handle more, I think, than any quarterback Ohio State has faced this year in terms of what they throw at him. So it'll just be the best barometer for Ohio State because they're going to play more of the Indiana type teams, obviously, in the college football playoff. And their schedule has not been what we thought it was going to be in August. Penn State was clearly not a national championship team. They were a fringe bowl team who fired their coach. And Texas, I think, is shown to actually be better, but they're a better team in November than they were in August. You saw Arch Manning go through some early season growing pains. He's better now. So it hasn't felt like Ohio State has really played a team anywhere near their class. And I think this will give us a sort of a better playoff preview for where the Buckeyes sit, even if it doesn't really affect their seeding a great deal.
Yeah, this is one of those games where not a ton is on the line, so you just want to see a great game. Ohio State really hasn't been in since Texas, 14-7. They haven't really been in a game that's come down to the fourth quarter, like who's going to win. A back and forth sort of just an exciting, really cool game to watch. So that's kind of what you may be looking for this Saturday.
Yeah, it'll be fun. I mean, it's a great matchup, first ever matchup of unbeatens in the Big Ten championship game, and Ohio State is coming off its first win over Michigan since 2019. So just how do they deal with the emotional, the potential for an emotional letdown? I do think a plus to them not treating Michigan as the end all be all of games and trying to have a more normal routine is you're not coming down maybe from the same high. It's still a high because it's still your arch rival, but I think that's a potential benefit of the way they structured the week.
I think it's also key that Indiana is as good as it is and ranked number 2 and undefeated. If this was an Iowa who had a couple losses and somehow had gotten in under the structure of the divisions, it'd be like ho hum, Could Ohio State really get up for the game? How really big is it? But it's probably benefits the Buckeyes that they're coming off this big win against Michigan, and yet they still have this, 1 versus 2 matchup, which kind of gets the blood boiling and gets you excited. So that's probably good for them that they don't really want to let down too much.
Yeah, it's I do like the division formats, contrary to I think maybe the prevailing opinion of everybody. I do like the divisions because it creates a situation where you have a fewer need for all these goofy tiebreakers. But it is nice that the Big Ten championship game actually feels a little climactic because so often we've seen Ohio State go to Indianapolis in the past, and you're facing a middling Big Ten West team that would be fourth overall in the conference standings, but just so happens to feed on some the weaker side of the division. So it's a cool thing that you actually feel like this is a game of equals.
Yeah. Yeah.
We will, of course, have more in the lead up to Ohio State, Indiana. A lot happening around the Buckeyes this week with the early signing period this week, the title game on Saturday, Selection Sunday right after that. So stay tuned to dispatch.com for more because you won't miss anything immediate. And as always, subscribe to this podcast, and we appreciate you all listening. Hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday, and thanks for joining us.